Chapter 28. The Glens of Antrim. There are some caves at the causeway which are said to be well worth visiting, but we found next morning that a stiff wind during the night had kicked up such a sea that it was impossible to get to them. So we spent the morning walking down to a beautiful beach some distance below the hotel, and building a driftwood fire there, and watching the waves roll in. Then, while Betty went in to read some just arrived letters from home, I went on along the top of the cliffs above the causeway. There is a path which follows the edge of the cliff closely, and a more magnificent view I have never seen. At Chimney Point, the rollers were breaking in especial violence over the black rocks, on which one of the galleons of the Armada went to pieces. Her name was the Girona, and some of her guns were rescued from the surf and added to the armament of Dunluce Castle. Legend has it that she brought her disaster upon herself by running in too near the coast to fire at the chimney rocks, which she mistook for the towers of Dunluce. The bay where the bodies of her crew were washed ashore has been called Port Hispania ever since. A little farther on is the uttermost point of all, Pleeskin, where the view reaches its greatest grandeur. For one is here 400 feet above the sea, and on that bright, clear, windswept morning I could see the purple peaks of the Donegal coast stretching far to the west, while to the northeast loomed the misty outline of the Scottish hills, scarcely discernible against the sky. And all between stretched the white-capped waters of the North Channel, with a tossing boat here and there, and at my feet were the last black basalt outposts of Erin, with the rollers curling over them in regular, heavy rhythm. If Ireland has anything to show more fair, I did not see it. I went slowly back at last, along the path, over the springy heather, and an hour later we had said goodbye to the causeway, and were rattling away along a pleasant road toward Ballycastle. We were the only voyagers that day, so instead of the heavy bus, a sidecar had been placed at our disposal. It was the first car we had mounted since our ride around Lough Gill, and how good it felt to settle back again into the corner of the seat, and swing along mile after mile. Our Jarvey was an old fellow who was loquacious enough at first, and to stop to show us, in a ravine not far from the causeway, a crevice in the rock which he said was used as a pulpit by the first Presbyterian preacher in Ulster. For it should be remembered that for many years the Presbyterians and other nonconformists were treated as harshly by the established church as the Catholics were. And then we came to a little village where the children were gathering for school, and our Jarvey stopped to water the horse, which gave us the opportunity to have a word with the children. And fairly surprised we were when they began to talk, for they spoke a Scotch as broad as any to be heard in the Highlands. Their names were Scotch too, Fergus and Angus. And the only thing we encountered on that drive which astonished us more were the signposts at the crossroads, the directions on which are all in Gaelic. We had seen Gaelic signposts before, in the west, but they always had the direction in English too. Here there was no English. It is a riddle that I have never unravelled, for I heard no Gaelic spoken here. Of course, it is spoken, but so many wayfarers along this road speak only English that I cannot understand the contempt for them which the signboards indicate. I have referred already to the Irishman's love for breakneck bridges, and the prize one of all is at the village of Ballintoy, into which the road drops down the steepest of hills. A little distance away along the cliffs is an isolated rock, some 60 feet from the shore, and spanning the abyss between cliff and rock is the craziest bridge ever devised by man. 2 rings, about 18 inches apart, have been embedded in the rock on either side, and between these rings 2 ropes have been stretched. These are lashed together at intervals by transverse cords, and to these cords short lengths of narrow plank have been tied side by side. For a handrail, a slender rope has been stretched between 2 rings some 3 feet higher than the others, and there you are. It is hardly correct to say that any of the ropes have been stretched, for they hang in a long curve, and in the wind that was blowing that morning, the bridge swung to and fro in the dizziest fashion. There was a crowd of small boys at its land end, who offered to negotiate the passage for a penny each, but we refused to pay for the privilege of seeing them risk their lives. And yet, probably, it would not have been risking them, for they were used to the bridge and thought nothing of crossing it. Nay, more, the men of the neighbourhood crossed it carrying heavy burdens, for they are fishermen and keep all their ropes and nets and even their boats out on the rock, round which, at certain stages of the tide, the salmon circle, so that they can be caught by nets shot out from the rock. There is no harbour for the boats, so they have to be hoisted up to a terrace in the rock some 20 feet above the water by means of a windlass. And then, having made everything snug, the fishermen cross back over the bridge with a catch on their shoulders. It need scarcely be added that I, who had balked the far more substantial bridges at Drumahare and Dunluce, never for an instant thought of crossing this one. We climbed out to the top of the cliffs again and jogged along with the beautiful sea to our left, and the beautiful rolling country to our right, its meadows brilliant with the lush green of the young flax. And then we turned our back inland between high hedgerows, and the bright sun and the soft air proved too much for our Jarvey, who dropped gently to sleep, a fact we didn't notice until the horse, after a backward glance, stopped to take a few bites from the hedge. The driver woke with a start and jerked the horse angrily back into the middle of the road, and then glanced guiltily at us, but we were gazing far away into the distance. And then he dropped off again, and again the horse, feeling the slackened reins, stopped for a bite. And then, for fear that a motorcycle or something might run into us, I filled my pipe and offered my pouch to the driver, and he filled up thankfully, and that kept him awake until we dropped down into the beautiful old town of Ballycastle, nestling under the high hills of Antrim. Bally, which figures in so many Irish place names, is from the Gaelic Balla, meaning town or village, and so Ballycastle is merely the Irish form of what in English would be prosaic Castletown. We had tea at a clean and pleasant inn, and then spent an hour wandering about the place, to the site of the old abbey, near a sweet little river, and then down to the shore, which has been desecrated with golf links. But the green slopes of Rathlin Island, just off the coast, are very lovely, and, just outside the bay, the cliffs culminate in a mighty bluff called Fairhead. And then back to the town along an avenue of beautiful trees, for a visit to the Home Industry Depot, a room crowded with fantastic toys, and some good wood carving, all done in the neighbourhood. About the only industry of any kind, so the keeper of the shop said, now carried on in Ballycastle. Time was when Ballycastle fancied it was destined for greatness, for a seam of coal was discovered in the hill above the town, and an enterprising Scotchman named Hugh Boyd leased the right to work it from the Earl of Antrim, and built foundries and tanneries and breweries to consume it. But unfortunately, the seam turned down instead of up. Boyd died, and nobody was found with sufficient energy to contend against so many difficulties. So the whole enterprise dropped dead. I don't know how the inhabitants came to turn to toy making and wood carving. Perhaps some expatriated Swiss settled here. That shop certainly did remind us of Lucerne. There are far older memories which cluster around Ballycastle, for the stream which ripples past the abbey was in the old days called the Margie, and it was here, according to the most ancient of Irish legends, that the children of Lir, king of the Isle of Man, sought shelter after they had been turned into 4 white swans by their stepmother. I should like to tell that story, but there is no space here. Besides, it has already been most nobly told by Mr. Olliston. It will be found, with many others, in his High Deeds of Finn, a book I most heartily recommend. We were not yet at the end of our day's journey, for we had still to go on to Cushendall, 16 miles away, and so we went back to the hotel to find a long inside car waiting. There were 2 other passengers, women of the neighbourhood, who had come into town to do some shopping, and their gossip was most entertaining. But we dropped them before long, and then the road mounted up and up along the valley of a little river, which we could see gleaming far below us. And at last we came out upon a bog as wild and desolate as any in Connemara. There were again the familiar black cuttings, the piles of turf, and here and there a group of men and women labouring at the wet, back-breaking work. This bog, so our driver said, supplied the fuel for the whole district, and nobody hereabouts ever thought of burning coal. The road was quite deserted, save for a cart now and then, loaded high with turf, lumbering heavily down toward the town. And presently even these ceased, for there was no single sign of life as far as the eye could reach, only the silent bog, desolate, vast, impressive, rolling away into the distance with a beauty all its own, a beauty difficult to express, but very poignant. How high we were upon that moor we did not realise until we came to the verge of one of the beautiful glens of Antrim, and saw, nestling away below us, the spires and roofs of Cushendall. They were perhaps half a mile away, but we travelled at least 3 miles to get down to them, winding back and forth along the side of the glen, crossing a great viaduct 80 feet high, past picturesque thatched houses, past the fairy thorn which no man in the village would touch for love or money, past a fragment of ruin which was once the castle where the MacDonalds stood off the English, and then we turned away to the right and began to climb again. And presently we had climbed out of Glendun into Glenanne, and I should hate to have to decide which is the more lovely. We emerged at last into more open country, with high hills at our right, pierced by shadowy valleys. And then the houses became more frequent, and we could see the people gathering down from the fields for the night. Twilight was at hand, but, though it must have been nearly 9 o'clock, we were amused to see that the ducks and chickens were still pecking cheerfully about the doorsteps, apparently with no thought of retiring. Poultry in Ireland leads a strenuous life, for in summer the sun rises at 3 and does not set till 9. Perhaps it is these long hours which give Irish chickens an indolent air, and which explain the frequent naps one sees them taking on the family doorstep. The houses grew more and more frequent, until we were rattling down a wide street of them, under an avenue of lofty trees, and knew we were at Cushendall. Some 3 miles west of the town, on the top of a bare and windy hill, looking down over the Glenanne valley, is a circle of stones placed there, so legend asserts, to mark the grave of Oisin, son of Finn MacCool, and sweet singer of the Fianna of Éireann. And it was to find this spot I set out next morning, through fine, windy weather. I knew what the valley of the Glenanne was, for we had passed its mouth the evening before. But as to the position of the grave itself, I knew nothing. The guidebook devoted only a vague line to it, but I have a firm belief in my luck, and I knew I should find it somehow. For a mile or more my road lay back over the way we had come, mounting steadily toward the entrance to the Glenanne valley, and I met many little carts coming in to market, for it was Saturday, and everyone who wasn't going into town was taking advantage of the fine day by working in the fields, or putting new coats of dazzling whitewash upon their houses, or digging in the little flower gardens in front of them. And everybody was in cheerful humour, and passed the time of day with the heartiest goodwill. And then I came to the entrance of the valley, and turned westward along the road which traverses it. The mountains soon began to close in on either hand, and the houses strung along the road or perched on narrow plateaus grew smaller and smaller. Slate gave way to thatch, stone floors gave way to dirt ones, and the windows shrank to a single immovable sash of 4 small panes. In a word, as the land grew poorer, the people grew poorer too, and the conditions of life seemed not so very different from those in far Connaught. Indeed, it may very well be that this is one of those congested districts which are scattered over the east of Ireland. I stopped at last and asked an old man in a blue flannel smock if he could tell me the way to Oisin's grave, and he told me to fare straight on till I came to some stepping stones, and to cross the stones and push right up the hill. So I went on happily, for the air was very sweet, and the sun just warm enough, and the great wind was driving white clouds before it across the sky, and the sunshine in the faces of the people I met added to the beauty of the day. And at last I came to a cluster of thatched cottages, where the little river turned in close to the road and rippled between a row of stepping stones. And I asked a pleasant-faced woman if that was the way to Oisin's grave, and she said it was. To cross the stones and go right up the hill, and I would find a house there where I could get further directions. The road beyond the stones ran up the hill and into the yard of a farmhouse, and in the yard there was a dog with a very savage bark. But there was also a blue-eyed girl who quieted him, while she stared at me curiously. I asked her the way to the grave, and she pointed up the hill with a little motion of her hand toward the right, and I set off again. The road had dwindled to the merest mountain path, with a wall on either side of earth and stones, crested with prickly gorse. But I came to a break in it at last, opening to the right, and scrambled through. And then, a minute later, in the midst of a heather-carpeted field on the very summit of the hill, I saw the grave. It is formed of standing stones, covered with lichen and crumbling under the storms of centuries, and the vestibule, so to speak, is a semicircle some 20 feet in diameter opening toward the east. Back of this are 2 chambers, one behind the other, divided by 2 large uprights, and I suppose it was in one of these that the body of the bard was laid, if it was laid here at all. My own guess would be that these weather-beaten stones, like those others on the hill beside Loch Gill, antedate Usheen by at least 2,000 years. But that is an unimportant detail, and it may be, indeed, that when the great singer died, his comrades could think of no more fitting place to lay him than within the guardian circle of this monument of an older race, looking down across the valley and out toward the sea. Fact and fancy have been so mingled in the Oceanic legend that it is impossible to disentangle them, nor is it profitable to try. It is fairly certain that he was born somewhere about the middle of the 3rd century after Christ, and legend has it that he spent 200 years in the land of youth with Niamh of the golden hair. When, homesick for Erin, he returned to it, it was to find his father's courts overgrown with grass, and St. Patrick preaching there, and his disputes with Patrick are recorded at great length in the tales of the Fenian cycle. For Usheen bewailed the vanished days of those mighty fighters, and wished for nothing better than to join them, in whatever world they might be, while Patrick laboured to convert him from such heathen fancies, and to save his soul. It is to this story reference is made in the stanza from Lionel Johnson's Ode to Ireland, which I quoted earlier. Up there on the bleak hilltop, the wind was roaring. But I found a nook between 2 of the great stones where it could not reach me, and I lighted my pipe and sat there, and looked down over the valley and thought of the old days, and so spent a sweet half-hour. The valley had changed but little, I fancied, with the rolling centuries. There were tiny high-walled fields and low-thatched houses on the lower slopes, but above them sprang the primal hills, clothed with heather, their bones of granite gleaming here and there, back and back over the glens of Antrim, through which the red tide of tribal warfare had poured so many times. And over eastward lay Cushendall, nestling among its trees, with a gaunt, truncated mass of Lurrigathan Hill overshadowing it. And beyond that, faint and far and scarcely distinguishable from the blue sky, lay the blue sea. That valley and those hills belonged to the Earl of Antrim. His estate includes some 35,000 acres of Irish soil, around which you may build walls and post notices and set guards. And, as I sat there gazing out at them, I realised far more keenly than I had ever done the absurdity of the idea that any portion of this earth's surface can rightfully belong to any man. Trace any title back for 100 years, or 1,000 years, or 2,000 years, and one finds that it started in a theft. Theft on the part of an individual from the tribe which held the land in common. And the solemn farce of sale and transfer and inheritance after that was merely the passing on of stolen goods. Perhaps someday we may win through to the ideal of an earth belonging equally to all men, with private right only in the things man's industry creates. I knocked my pipe out at last, reluctantly enough, and took the picture of the stones which is opposite this page, but which gives a poor idea of them. And then I started downward, through the break in the hedge, through the farmyard, going warily for fear of the dog, and so to the stepping stones. And, when I looked at them, I saw what a perfect picture they made, with the stream rippling through, and the thatched cottages beyond, with the smoke whipped from their chimneys, and a single tree bending before the wind. That picture in miniature is opposite this page, but I could not snare with my camera the tang of the turf, the softness of the air, the glory of the sun, nor the murmur of the water. Those you will have to evoke for yourself, as best you can. In the road beyond I found a mail carrier, who had completed his morning round among the hillside dwellings, and who was turning back to Cushendall. And we went on together. He was a tall, lithe lad, as he had need to be, to get over his daily route among these hills. And, like everyone else, he hoped someday to win his way to America. He knew many of its towns from the postmarks and the letters he carried. In the last month, he said, there had been fully 100 from America. And welcome letters they were, for nearly all of them contained a bit of money. Many of the dwellers in these hills, like thousands more all over Ireland, would find life outside the workhouse impossible, but for the help from their sons and daughters in America. And it gives one a good feeling at the heart to think of those devoted boys and girls, putting by every month a portion of the money which was hard to win and harder still to save, to send to the old people who were left at home. By the side of the road, as we walked along, I saw a hovel more primitive and comfortless than most. Just a tiny hut of a single room, dark and cold and bare. But against one end of it grew a great fuchsia bush, clothing it with glory. A wrinkled old woman, clad in filthy clothes, was standing in the doorway, and my companion passed the time of day with her while I unslung my camera, for I wanted a picture of the tiny house and the great bush. I would have liked a picture of the old woman too, but she said she was too dirty, and went in until the picture was taken, which is opposite the next page. Then she came out and asked if I would send her one. It was the first time, she said, that anyone had thought her housing worth a picture. So I promised she should have one, and she gave me her name, and the postman promised it should reach her. We went on together after that, and I asked him what the people of the neighbourhood thought about Home Rule. "The truth is, sir," he answered, "that we don't know what to think, what with this man telling us one thing and that man another. But most of the poor people about here will be glad to see it, for they can't be worse off than they are, and a change might better them. Drilling and arming? There's none of that around here. There's no army of Ulster in these parts. That's just talk." He left me at the crossroads, for he still had a letter or two to deliver farther down the road, and I went on by myself toward the town. There were more whitewashers out, and they were splashing the lime about in the most reckless fashion, besprinkling the hedges and the shrubbery, and even the road, somewhat to the danger of the passers-by. And at the first houses of the town I met Betty. She had been talking to the caretaker of the churchyard about the true shamrock, and he said that it did not grow wild thereabouts, but that he had some in a pot at home, and would be glad to bring her a spray. And he told her of a ruined church and an old Celtic cross out along the road above the cliffs. Very near, he said, not over 8 minutes' walk at the most. So we determined to take a look at it. But first we walked about the town a little, and found it quite an ordinary town, except for a great square tower at the intersection of the principal streets. A tower erected, so the tablet on it says, as a place of confinement for rioters and idlers. I suppose the town is a modern jail now, perhaps even with panoptic galleries. At any rate, the tower is no longer used. I took a picture of it, and if you look at the picture closely, you will see a girl drawing water from the town pump, just below the tower. We started off finally for the ruins, first to the cliffs along the sea, and then on along the path which runs at their very edge. The view was very lovely, and we didn't notice how the time was flying. But I looked at my watch presently, and found that we had been walking 20 minutes, with no ruins in sight. We pushed on 10 minutes longer, and had about given them up, when some children directed us which way to go. And we finally found the few remaining fragments of Lade Church, so overgrown with ivy and embowered in trees, that they were scarcely recognisable as ruins at all. The cross proved to be a very modern one, and the graveyard is sadly neglected, with the grass knee-deep among the tombs, which have fallen into sorry disarray. Most of them cover some long-dead MacDonald. They were all MacDonalds in the old days, who lived in the Glens of Antrim. The 8-minute walk had taken more than half an hour, and we had need to hasten if we were to get back to the hotel in time for lunch, for the car which was to take us to Larne was to start at 2. But we made it, and when the car drove up, we found it was a long outside car with room for 5 people on each side. We chose the forward end at the side next the sea, and then the car proceeded to another hotel in the town, where 5 or 6 more people were waiting, and the 2 women who were condemned to the landward side complained bitterly. They were making the trip, they said, just to see the sea, and here they would be compelled to sit the whole way facing the blank cliff. "Sure, there's nothing I can do, miss," said the Jarvey, who had listened sympathetically. "I can't make the car any longer, now, can I? Maybe I might be glancing over your shoulder from time to time. Anyway, I'm thinking you'll be seeing enough of the sea before you're home again." And with that, they had to be consoled. The road runs inland for about a mile beyond Cushendall, and then turns down close to the shore of Red Bay, a vast amphitheatre of red sandstone cliffs, in whose face the road is cut. At the deepest point of the circle, where the Vale of Glenariff opens up into the mountains, is clustered a little village of white houses. And then the road runs on round the base of towering precipices. and suddenly the red sandstone changes to chalk, and the water washing against the shore, which has been a lovely green, turns milky white, with outstanding pinnacles of chalk, worn to fantastic shapes, keeping guard above it. We had noticed an increasing crowd upon the road, all walking or riding southwards. And presently, 2 barefooted boys jumped up on the footboard and asked if they might ride a little way. And they told us that there was a circus at Carnlough to which everyone was going, and they each had the tuppence necessary for admission gripped in a grimy fist, and were very excited indeed. Carnlough, as we soon found, is a small town consisting principally of a curving beach, where a few people were bathing. And the white tent of Duffy's Circus, a much larger affair than Buff Bill's, was pitched close beside the road. The urchins dropped off and made for the entrance. And as we passed, we caught a strain of The Stars and Stripes Forever, painfully rendered by the circus band. We rolled on around another wide bay and came to Glenarm, where we paused to change horses. And then on again, under the white cliffs, past quarries where flint and chalk are mined for the Belfast market. And always at our feet lay the Irish Sea, stretching away to the dim horizon, its colour changing with every passing cloud. In and out the road circled, following the long curves of the coast, past the ruins of a castle which O'Halloran, a famous outlaw, built for himself on the top of a small rock, with the sea washing round it, past another amphitheatre where the rocks change back from chalk to basalt, through a short tunnel, and so to Larne. The most interesting thing about Larne is its handsome new harbour built for the express steamers, which cross several times a day to Stranraer, the shortest of the routes to Scotland. Edward Bruce chose this route when he came over with an army of 6,000 men to help the Irish drive the English from Ireland, as his brother Robert had driven them from Scotland the year before at Bannockburn. It was in May 1315 that the Scotch drew up in battle array along this strand, and a year later Bruce was crowned King of Ireland. But, though at first he drove the Normans before him, his own army was gradually worn down by privation and disease, and he himself was killed at the Battle of Faughart. So ended one more Irish dream. We changed at Larne from road to rail, and were soon rolling southward, still close beside the water, past a string of seaside resorts, each of which added its quota of passengers, perspiring men and women, and tired but happy children. And so we came to the old town of Carrickfergus, with its magnificent castle overlooking Belfast Lough. Its great square keep, 90 feet high, looked most imposing in the gathering twilight. How many assaults had it withstood in the 7 centuries of its existence? Bruce captured it, but the Macdonalds failed. Schomberg, William's general, had better luck, and it was on the quay below it that the great Orangeman first set foot in Ireland. It has some American associations too, for John Paul Jones sailed his good ship Ranger under its walls in 1778 and captured the British ship of war, Drake. Murray, good British guidebook that it is, referred to the founder of the American Navy as the pirate Paul Jones. But we can afford to smile at that. Carrickfergus is doubtless worth a visit, though the castle is used as an ordnance depot now, and visitors are admitted only to the outer court. But even that would be worth seeing. And the town possesses an old church, and some fragments of its old walls, and doubtless many interesting old houses. I am sorry we did not spend a day there. But our train rolled on, close beside the border of Belfast Lough, and presently, far ahead, we saw the gleaming spires and clustered roofs of the citadel of Ulster.